And we're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Red Devils. And a bit of a weird morning waking up in the wake of what I think is fair to describe as the biggest crisis in Manchester United history. Not so much just the literal season we are having, but where we are as a club. And the more you dig, the more you start to understand what's actually going on in the club, the scarier it gets, to be honest, to understand how close this club is literally from going bankrupt and potentially, getting points deductions, dropping down into like championships, for example, if we just literally were to implode, because it could happen. And it's a lot of very complicated, different sort of explanations to why this is all happening. But basically, with all the various different debts we've got going on that need refinancing soon, and the interest we're paying on these debts, the likes of that, as well as obviously failed transfers and stuff like that, means that we are currently sort of basically the best way I can describe United right now is that Ruben Amorim's basically got both hands tied behind his back while being dangled over a tank of sharks with INEOS holding him onto him and the Glazers holding a pair of scissors ready to cut it. That's probably the best way I can kind of describe it, because the Glazers have basically, they fill the tank with water. They sourced the sharks, probably on probably borrowed the sharks and probably loaned them out at a very high interest rate. They then paid somebody to cuff Ruben Amorim, and they're ready to drop him into the sharks, because we're sitting as a club in a situation where we have to cost cut to the absolute nth degree in order to become somewhat financially stable, because we are sitting with loans in stupid amounts, over £400 million in bond loans. That is purely from the Glazers. We've got loans from our transfers, which are sort of £300 million. And, we've got a lot of this has to be refinanced very soon. And if we, for example, default, or if we don't sort of pass certain financial checkpoints, then all the loans that have been sort of given to us by various banks of America, Santander's, for example, one of them, and the likes of that, the banks can come calling, and United will just not have the literal cash to be able to pay back what it is owed. And that is why right now INEOS's big mission is quite simple. It is to get the club back to sort of some sort of financial stability, but more to the point, just reduce absolutely any cost whatsoever, so that we can try and get that debt down. And what's very interesting is obviously going to see what's going to happen in the next year or two, because in 6 months' time there's an option where the Glazers can actually sell, and a different investor can come in, for example. But Jim Ratcliffe at the moment has the option to then potentially make the bid or make an offer to buy up the Glazers' share of the clubs. Whether he will, whether not, I don't know. I think it's an interesting one. If they were serious about United, then this is something they would be looking to do. They'll be looking to try and make sure that they look at buying up the shares from the Glazers in terms of being able to input that equity. The problem is they've already had to put in, 300, 400, 500 million pounds just to make sure that United don't slip into sort of financial ruin, literal financial ruin, in terms of not being able to pay the payments on the loans and stuff like that, which at the moment are down at sort of 16, 17 million pounds a year. But that could very well go up to more than double that in a couple of years' time if we don't bring the debt down, if we don't start servicing the debt a lot more than what we are currently doing. And the problem is, given the fact that we're now running at a loss for 5 years in a row, that's going to impact our ability to go and buy players. Because at the moment, we've actually been using a revolving credit facility to go out and sign players. That's why post 2015, especially, we were going and making lots of big money signings. The one thing we can't deny is that United have spent a lot of money in the transfer market, badly, very, very badly, but we have spent big money. And lots of people sitting questioning, well, how are we able to do that? And it's because of the fact we've got these credit facilities, and because of, as the club, we do make a lot of money. But the last 5 years, in particular, since COVID, it's been an absolute shit show where we have been consistently losing money and not been able to replace it. And the problem is, with all the money going into servicing debts and the likes of that, there's just no way we're bringing this debt down. And with the new financial regulations being far stricter and far more about financial sustainability, which they do need to be, I think it's really good to see that it's not a case of people can just come in, invest stupid amounts of money, buy all the players they want, buy teams, and actually not be financially sound. The only reason that teams are actually making it from a year-to-year basis is because they just continue to invest more money. Like, oh, well, we're going to make a 20 million loss. And the owner's like, oh, it's fine. Well, I'll just cover the 20 million loss, with some sort of, sponsorship inverted commas that we just announced this weird partnership with a random company that's going to conveniently cover everything. So we're going to break even so we can go spend more money and win trophies. And these clubs kind of became, these sort of, especially the ones that kind of like state funded, these owners sort of play things. And that is the big thing, Bush, that needs to change, because at the highest level, it's one thing, but this is happening at lower levels as well. And that's where it becomes really, really bad, because you've got these, smaller clubs where owners come in, invest a reasonable amount of money, but then they're going to want their return on investment, and they're not getting it, and clubs are just not sustainable. So that's the whole point. It's about sustainability when it comes to the new sort of financial regulations. Now, for United to start to be able to spend again, we've got to sell. And this is why Garnacho, Marcus Rashford, even somebody like Kobe Manu become big assets for United, because they can be sold at pure profit. I don't think we're going to sell Kobe Manu in the summer. Garnacho, we'll wait and see. But I think Marcus Rashford leaves, regardless of whether he plays well. And the reason is very simple. Even if Marcus Rashford goes and scores, 10 goals for Aston Villa in the next 2 months, United will probably look to offload him because it's pure profit. Any money we need for the summer transfer window is probably going to come from signings and the likes of that. So, you need to sell Marcus Rashford to create £40 million of pure profit that you can actually go spend on players. Even offloading Anthony, for example, it's money back into the bank. It's not pure profit. So, if you sell Anthony for £60 million, we don't suddenly have £60 million to spend. It doesn't quite work like that. But if you sell Rashford for £40 million, you can spend that £40 million if you want to on players. So it's very, very important that in the next few months, we start to understand exactly who we want to go after, exactly who we want to get rid of, the kind of prices, for example, we can start to mine, and maybe some of the other players we can look to try and offload. So, things like when we saw, selling other academy players becomes very, very important, because it's about freeing up the money. If academy players aren't going to be good enough to be a United player long term, then if we can get any sort of money, 5, 6, even 10 mil, 15 mil, then that becomes a big boost for our transfer host, because at the moment our transfer ins firmly sit and rest on our transfer outs. And if there are no transfer outs, there will be no transfer ins. We don't have a war chest of £200 million to go and bring players in. And that's why when you see these, links to Djokovic, who's going to cost us, 90, £100 million, it's just not going to happen. We don't have that kind of money. When you see Harry Kane could cost you £55 million, however, you sit there going, right, well, we sell Marcus Rashford at 40. We can sell Anthony at, 20, and we can try and move a couple of deals around. We can maybe then become a genuine option to be able to sign Harry Kane at £55 million, for example. We're not going to see transfers north of 80, 90 million, £100 million at United this summer. We can't, and the problem at the moment, and this is why I said Ruben Amorim's currently got his hands tied behind his back, dangled over a tank of sharks, with Glazers ready to cut the rope, is that we've brought in a manager, and this is why I think, it's not necessarily Ruben Amorim's fault, but I think we've brought in a manager who has to rebuild a very specific squad without us having the capacity to go out and get that squad. I think this is probably the biggest problem. This is where INEOS' biggest failure has been so far, is they've brought in a manager that could not work with the squad we've got, that needs transfer windows, period, to be able to build a team that might work. There's no guarantee. He doesn't have quite the credentials that Pep Guardiola has. There's no guarantee that if you do build the system and players that you want for the system, success will automatically arrive. We don't have that guarantee. But what is guaranteed at the moment is that he's not going to succeed until he gets that chance of bringing in players. But we don't have the capacity to bring in players, and this is why people are saying, well, we brought in the wrong manager. And that's not necessarily to say we brought in the wrong manager because he's not good enough. It's we brought in the wrong manager because we've brought in a manager that can't work with the current players and can't, for example, necessarily get the best out of what he has, because, he's very set in how he wants to play and the type of players he wants. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of system-based managers. Pep Guardiola, I'm not going to call him a system-based manager, but he's always had to have teams built to his specifics to be able to play the way he's played. If you watch All or Nothing Manchester City, for example, they talk about how difficult it is to find a fullback for Pep, and that's why he goes through fullbacks like they're going out of fashion. And players like Carvalho will come in, not Carvalho, left back, and just gonna drive me up the wall now. Had a phenomenal season, was on loan next season, and they go through £50 million. Literally always seems to be £50 million to fullbacks, like it's going out of fashion because that's such an important position for him. So there's certain managers that need certain players, certain types of players to be able to succeed, and Ruben Amorim clearly sort of seems to be that kind of person. But again, we've brought in a manager that needs players for a system that we can't actually provide. And that is why I think, we would have been a lot better off with finding what is the best manager we can find that can work with the players we've got, that can sort of implement a system that these players are comfortable with, that these players can operate within. And then how can we then slowly add players to just take the general level of the squad up? And we've probably got to take a 2 to 3 year strat, and basically say, right, next season we're going to try and be, I don't know, top 8. Let's put the cards on the table. We're not going to be a Champions League club next season. That's just not going to happen. We can't go from where we are, sitting at 15th, to suddenly being at 4th. We're not going to climb 11 places on the Premier League table in a year. So what are the small steps we're going to take, and how are we going to take them? If we're sitting there saying, right, next year we want to try and be in the top 8, and we're going to try and see, we can try and bring 2-3 players in the summer, smart signings, build a squad. There'll be a young squad, build a squad next year, try and get into the top 8. Then after that, year after that, that's when you're going to sit there and say, right, can we now make a push for Champions League football? Because we don't have the team right now to be able to do that. Whether we've got the players to do that, maybe, I don't know. Maybe with the right manager, some of these players can maybe turn things around and produce that. But right now, we do not have the team to contend for top 4. We do not have the team to win trophies. If we were to go win the Europa League this season, it would be phenomenal. I just don't see how it happens. With the injuries we've got, with the performances we've got at the moment, we do not have a trophy-winning team. Whether we've got trophy-winning players is up for debate. Whether we've got a trophy-winning manager is also up for debate. But you can have trophy-winning manager, and you can have trophy-winning players, and still not have a trophy-winning team, if that makes sense. Because if the two aren't aligned, and if the two don't match, you're never going to get that success. And this is, I think, where we sit at the moment, is that we're sitting with players where some of them might be good enough, some of them might not be good enough. We're sitting with a manager who might very well be good enough, but he's got the wrong group of players at the wrong time. This kind of group of players got the wrong manager for them, and as a result, the combination is a situation where we just can't compete. And this is why we're seeing like David Moyes go into an Everton where he can understand what he's got and he can use what he's got at a high level. And lots of managers are doing that. Nottingham Forest should never be sitting in third. They are not the third best team in the league, but they're the third best team in the league this season, because they're playing above themselves. They've managed to make some very smart signings. They've created a system which suits the players, and you've got Mark Wood becoming one of the best strikers in the league all of a sudden. And Nuno Espirito Santo is doing an absolute phenomenal job this season. And it's cool to see. It's really, really cool to see. And I think the main thing United need to take out is that it can be done, and it doesn't have to be done on this stupidly large budget. Not to say that Nottingham Forest haven't spent money. They have. They've gone to the days where your non-top 6 sides don't spend money. They've brought in players and they have spent money, but they've made really smart signings and then created a team and environment where they can thrive. They spent. Milinkovic was I think about £10 million. I think they spent 35 million on Anderson. They spent a lot of players on sort of 10, 15 million signings, quite a few around there, and they're sort of building this team. And that's the thing, United's scouting network is letting us down right now, because why is it that all the time we have to go and buy some ready-made, well-known type of player, or else we have to get our third or fourth or fifth different target, where you've got somebody like Chris Wood, who's been around the block. I don't think anybody could really have guessed or predicted the season he was going to have, but he was around. And he was there, and all of a sudden you managed to be able to create a system where it works. And that's what we need to see more of, the ability to be able to go and get somebody like Alexander Isaac. He's coming up as 20th goal in the Premier League. Chris Wood scored 18. You know, Brian Mbeumo from Brentford, he's sitting on about 14, 15 odd goals. And then we've got our 80 million pound or 70 million pound or whatever it was in the end, you know, signing it for Rasmus Højlund, who is, I think, got like 3 Premier League goals, something stupid this season. And that's not to say that, you know, Rasmus Højlund is not a good player, but this is the thing, you know, Chris Wood costs, I think, 16 million pounds. 18, it's less than £1 million per goal. If we got £1 million per goal for Rasmus Højlund, we'd be sitting with, you know, you'd be sitting with the best striker in the world. So it's a combination of us having signed really poorly in the past, but also just not being able to identify and make the smart deals. And I think we need to move away from the fact that we don't, you know, I think Lenny Euro is a great signing and probably something more we need, but even that's a £50 million signing. We need to become a club that can start to identify, you know, the sort of younger, smarter signings and be able to produce more talent. Because that's the only way we're going to be able to really come up. We can no longer go and spend stupidly large amounts of money. And the problem is, you know, at the moment, we've still got the Manchester United reputation. That Manchester United reputation is going to ruin us because we get inflated transfer fees. We get clubs who know they can take us for a bit of a ride, and we can't find the right sort of signings because we've Manchester United. So it's a big club, inverted commas, and therefore we must pay through the nose and we must, you know, sign big players. And I don't know how we get away from that, but we've got to. We've got to find players around the world where we can start making more smart signings alongside maybe a couple of big signings here and there, but we've got to try and just improve the floor of the squad, not the ceiling, the floor. You know, and create a bigger gap between some of the best players and the worst players. And if we could just improve as a squad, step by step, you know, almost finding out, right, who's the weak link. Take the complete opposite thing. Who's the lowest point of the squad? How do we improve that threshold? You know, how do we make sure that the lowest level of player is higher than it was last season? So the lowest level of performance is a little higher than what the lowest was last season. And so we can start turning some of those results, which you shouldn't be losing, into victories. Not necessarily that all of a sudden next season we're going to beat Liverpool, we're going to beat City and the likes of that. How do we make sure that we are comfortably beating your bottom, even 5 to 10 teams? And making sure that you're then drawing against maybe, you know your other teams, your Villas and the likes of that. And then maybe it'll be a shock victory here and there. But this is the thing. You look at our table, for example, and we're losing as much as we are winning. In fact, we're losing more than we are winning at the moment. So how do we turn that around? How do we make sure that next season, instead of 8 wins, 6 draws, and 12 losses, we're sitting with 12 wins, 8 draws, and 6 losses? Because that suddenly puts you at 7th. You know, that's the kind of swing, or 8, which is still not where we want to be, but that I think is more realistic about what we want to do next season, is try and get to being in that sort of top 8 at this stage. Even the top half of the bloody table we probably take right now. But again, as we mentioned, it's incredibly difficult to do that because we just don't have the resources and we don't have the facility to be able to get that. I don't think people understand quite how bad the loans and the finance situation is. And look, it's not. INEOS has to cost cut, and we're sitting in such a weird situation where we're quite resentful for the cost cuts. Of course, 200, 450 jobs being made redundant to save costs. You know, the whole canteen, no free lunch, and some fans are saying, "Well, damn right, you shouldn't have free lunch." Some fans saying, and somebody rightly said, no more free lunches for a year. That will pay 3 weeks of Casemiro's wages. And the more you sort of make these comparisons, the more you can find out why the core issue of the club is that we pay far too much for the wrong things. We've got to bring that wage bill down significantly. We almost need to halve the wage bill. And because that'll save us millions, literally millions. You know, Casemiro left and we didn't replace him, for example, you'd be saving over £1 million a month. That's £6 million you'd save between now and like August. You know, and £6 million, for example, if you can start refinancing that into some of the debt and start reducing that debt, just slowly and surely starting to reduce that debt, that starts to open up more options for us to be able to then financial sort of levers that we can then trigger to be able to give us spending money for players. And you've got a new stadium coming up. I mean, how are we going to finance that? Who bloody knows? So that's the thing. So I think the main point to take away is that I think we need to realize how much trouble we are currently in, and that's not going to be an easy fix. And the sooner we can kind of wrap our heads around that and tape away expectations, the more we can kind of understand what kind of journey we're in. But then we need to start to scrutinize the small decisions, because the small decisions are going to be the big decisions now, to be honest. It's not about what the stadium's going to be. It's about, right, what players are you going to sell instead? Where are we going to cut money? Where are we going to invest money? Scouting network, stats, how can we start saving money by investing in other places? That's the thing. If you go invest into a scouting network that saves you 80, 90, 100 million pounds on transfer fees, that's fine. But you have to actually be willing to take the risk and invest 5 to 10 million pounds into that scouting network to save you the 80. And it's not going to be a full zero-sum game. You can't spend 0 and save 80. You have to spend something to save something. But it's, again, how do we just do that a little bit better? But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.